We're in the studio today to talk about exterior window trim. We'll talk about a couple of different aesthetic options, a couple of different materials, and a few different ways to put this whole package together. But mostly what we're going to be focused on is what you see here. A pretty traditional setup using Kleer PVC. Now, Kleer is a really popular choice because it's got a nice smooth surface, crisp edges and profiles, and most importantly, it's impervious to water. You could do this whole installation on the wall, but my preference, and I really think the better way to do it, is to do the whole thing on the bench. When I first started doing carpentry work, I used to install all of my exterior casing right in place on the wall, piece by piece. I did it that way for years, and honestly, the results were horrible. It's really difficult to take each individual piece, put it in place, and fasten it to the wall without it rocking out of alignment because of the buildup of flashing tape and the nailing fins. It's a lot easier to just come down here and build it on the table. You have a nice flat surface, the conditions are controllable, I'm not up on a ladder or scaffolding, and when I put it all together down here, it hangs together as one piece. And that's really important if you want the trim to last. We'll be assembling the trim on the bench, but obviously we need to take our measurements from the actual window. You can either do this when the window's still on the ground, or you can do it after installation. It doesn't matter. If you have multiple windows that are the same dimensions, that's where you start to get really efficient with this process because one set of measurements is now repeatable across many windows. Now for the side casing, we want to do the actual window height, including any little nibs or pieces that stick up, so outermost point to outermost point. So we take that actual measurement, which in this case is about 40 3/4, and we want to add 1/8 of an inch to that. And that gives me a 1/16 inch at the top and bottom, gives me a little wiggle room during installation, and I can put some sealant in there. So that one's easy. That's 40 7/8, perfect. For the width, we do the same thing, outside point to outside point. We add in our same 1/8 of an inch. So in this case, it's 29 3/4 plus 1/8 is 29 7/8. Then we have to add in the width of the trim itself. In this case, the 4-inch nominal trim is actually 3.5 inches. So it's a total of 7, 3.5 and 3.5. So we have 29 7/8 plus 7 is 36 7/8. Now those measurements are assuming that the pieces of trim are going to be flush on the outside edge. In some styles, you add a little overhang right here. So all you have to do is figure out what the length of that overhang is, let's say a 1/2 inch, multiply it by 2, and then add it to your total. The important thing here is just come up with your system, write everything down, so that when you go down to your saw, you have confidence that all the pieces you're going to cut, once they come together, are going to fit perfectly. Before cutting parts to length, cut a rabbet on the back side of the trim pieces by making 2 cuts on the table saw. Once assembled, this rabbet will create a cavity for the nailing flange so the trim assembly can sit flat against the sheathing without interference. Let's talk about exterior window sills. Now, whether you buy one off the shelf, like we have here, or you make your own on site, which we'll get into in a minute, there's a couple of different design traits that you want to make sure you have incorporated because they really matter in terms of water management and durability. Now, what we have here is the historic sill. It's a Kleer brand product, and it's PVC, and we have PVC casing dyeing down into it. The first thing to look for in a sill is that it has a sloped surface. Now, pre-made sills typically have that already built in. If you make your own on site, 10 to 15 degree bevel is what you want, but it's really up to you in terms of aesthetics. The idea is that as water comes down, it's going to hit that slope, and it's going to encourage the water to keep moving instead of pooling. And that's really important in terms of water management because the longer you have water sitting against that window, the greater chance you have of a leak. So you want it to get down and out as quick as possible. That's also why the sill is thicker, it projects out farther than the rest of the trim. You want to avoid that picture frame style window casing, A, because it just doesn't look very good, and B, because it doesn't help in terms of water management. The sill being thicker than the casing means that the water is out here when it drips down, instead of being back here where your siding is going to be. But in order for it to drip down, you really have to make sure you include this little groove. Because believe it or not, as water runs down here, surface tension of the water is going to make it want to travel horizontally until it hits your siding, and then it's going to drip down there. And that can lead to more water problems. One other thing that you want to look for is this groove on the back of the sill. and that allows you to tuck your siding up underneath for a nice clean installation. Let's talk about stock options when you're making your own sill on site. Whenever possible, I like to use 2x stock, which is 1.5 inches thick, because I think it looks substantial and it most closely mimics those historic sills that we're really trying to reproduce with our trim package. Typically you can get 2x stock in whatever trim material you're choosing to use. It's just in some cases it could be a special order item. In this example, we're using 2x red cedar, a naturally rot-resistant wood option. Unlike the PVC in the previous example, a wood sill will need to be painted or treated on all sides to be weather resistant and will require maintenance over time, but is still an excellent traditional option. To mill a sill from 2x stock, use a table saw to cut the 15-degree slope. Then lower the blade and cut the drip groove under the front edge. Finally, make 2 passes along the back side of the sill to cut the notch for siding, and cut the sill to length. Another popular option is to use 5/4 stock, which is 1 inch thick. One option with using 5/4 stock is to do it just like you did the 2x sill. Cut it flat on the bottom, bevel, drip, and a notch for the siding. Another option when using 5/4 stock is to do something like this, where the sill is actually set on an angle rather than just a bevel being cut into the top. In this example, we're using Boral True Exterior, which is a polyash material. Similar to PVC, this product is impervious to water, it's easy to cut and shape using common woodworking tools, and is very dimensionally stable throughout the seasons. To cut this sill, rip the front and back edges at 15 degrees. Then lower the blade and cut the drip groove on the underside of the front edge, and finally cut the notch for siding. In this configuration, the corresponding trim piece will also be cut at 15 degrees so that it mates with the top of the sill. There's a bunch of options for how to put the trim pieces together, whether it's floating tenons that you cut using domino, or biscuits are a traditional choice. I prefer to use pocket screws, and that's what we're going to do here. So each one of these leg pieces is going to get 2 pocket holes, and those are going to go up into the headpiece. Regardless of what fasteners you use, you want to always make sure there's glue in that joint. If you're using polyash trim, polyurethane adhesive is going to work well. If you're using wood trim, then you want to use a waterproof variety of PVA glue or polyurethane glue. Now for PVC trim, we're going to be using PVC cement. This is as simple as brushing a coat of glue onto either piece, but you don't want to put the pieces together while the glue is wet. You actually want to set that piece aside, and you have to wait for that glue to get tacky. Part of the way this glue works is it has a solvent in it, and it's essentially just melting the PVC, for lack of a better term, and that allows it to fuse together permanently. So again, we're gonna put a coat on the ends of the leg pieces. We'll put another little coat where those leg pieces are going to hit the head. And then we'll just set it aside for a couple of minutes and wait for that to dry. While this is tacking up, let's just talk about fasteners. We're going to be using pocket hole screws for this assembly, and they're exterior rated pocket hole screws, which is really important because you don't want to use conventional pocket hole screws, which are only for interior use. They will corrode and lead to problems. It's worth noting too, if you're using wooden trim for this, the pre-primed pine stock, you want to actually get some primer into those pocket holes as well, because that's going to be an area that might be prone to water infiltration leading to premature rot. All right, let's just check and see if this is tacky. Yep, looks good. I'm going to slide the pieces together, check that they're aligned on this edge. I'm just going to clamp the 2 pieces down to the tabletop to make sure that they stay aligned, and we'll sink these screws in. We'll repeat the process on this end. One of the last things we have to do on this before putting the sill on is attaching a piece of head flashing. Head flashing is just this little piece right here. It has a leg on here and a slope, and it attaches on the top of the casing so that water will run down and drip away. Just like the other pieces, we're going to put a little adhesive on both the underside of this and the top of the head casing so that when we put them together, they will be permanently bonded. And once this all tacks up, I'm just going to put this piece in place, and then we'll fire a couple of nails into there. And the nails are doing nothing else but just holding it tight while the glue sets up. Last step here is to attach the sill. So we're just going to flip this over. We'll have it backside up. We've got our sill stock. And we just want to drill 2 pilot holes on either end, and those are going to go up into the end grain of the leg casing. We'll just get a couple of screws started here. Now, even though we're using screws, we're also going to make sure we use that PVC adhesive. We'll also apply it to the legs. Give that a couple of minutes to tack up, and then we'll fasten it on. Now, even though we've notched these other pieces of casing to go around the nailing fin, this one we're not going to notch. We're just going to line it up so that it's lined up with the notch. Okay, that's it. Let's see how it fits. Just want to check for a reveal along all sides, make it nice and even. That's looking really good. So next up, we're going to talk about fastener options. For fastening trim, you have a couple of different options. The old standby is corrosion-resistant nails. And these have a full head, which means that when you sink them, the head is going to come just flush to the surface, so it's actually going to be visible. You might hide it under a coat of paint, but it is a chance that you're still going to get to see them. This is definitely the traditional choice, though. Another option is a conventional corrosion-resistant construction screw. This you would sink below the surface and fill either with a caulk gun sealant or a 2-part epoxy putty. You don't want to do filling. You can get color-matched trim head screws, and these you would sink so they're just flush with the surface, and then you would just leave them unfinished. The last option would be a hidden fastener system. And the way these work is as you drive the screw, they basically create a counter bore. And then you can plug that counter bore with a piece of matching material, so you don't have to come back and do any patching and finishing work. Finish up with a bead of sealant between the window frame and trim on the sides and top, but leave the bottom open for drainage. Once the window sealant is in and smoothed out, this installation is done. With all the care and attention to detail we put into this window trim should last for a long, long time.